Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually when I see a headline involving AI and education in the same sentence, my immediate reaction is to just brace for impact.
Oh, yeah.
It's always about cheating scandals or robots replacing teachers or just like churning out mediocre essays in 3 seconds.
It is. It's a full-on panic cycle. We tend to focus entirely on the disruption, on the noise. We just worry about what's being taken away.
Exactly. But today we're going to a different kind of room. We're going to take you inside the Create+AI challenge ceremony.
Hosted by the Stanford Accelerator for Learning.
Right, with support from google.org.
If you look at the, 305 teams that submitted ideas from all over the world.
And the 12 winners we're going to talk about.
Yeah, especially them. They are not trying to build a faster calculator. They're actually engaging in a philosophical argument about what school is even for.
Okay, that's a big claim. But I think I see where it starts. It's in the opening remarks from Sarahi Espinoza Salamanca. She gets up there and just draws a line in the sand. I think it frames this whole deep dive, really. She talked about the efficiency trap.
Right, and this is the core tension of our time. The default mode for AI, especially, in the corporate world, is efficiency.
How do we do things faster?
How do we automate the boring stuff? How do we grade 1,000 papers in 10 minutes? And if you see education as an efficiency problem, well, then the goal of AI is to remove the human element.
Because humans are slow.
Yeah.
And expensive.
And tired. But Sarahi's point, and the whole point of this challenge, was that education isn't an efficiency problem. She called it a human development mission.
Which changes the entire engineering goal.
Completely. If the goal is human development, you don't want to replace the effort. You want to augment the potential. You want to make the human more capable, not less necessary.
Augment, not automate.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the bumper sticker for today, but I want to push on that because augmentation can be a bit of a buzzword.
It can, yeah.
It sounds nice in a TED Talk, but when you have 300 submissions, how do you actually judge that? How do you separate the flashy gimmicks from the stuff that actually helps a brain learn?
Well, they actually published their framework, and it's surprisingly rigorous. Imagine a triangle.
Okay.
You need 3 points for a stable structure.
Right.
Point 1 is, obviously, technology. Is the code good? Is it scalable? All that.
Yeah.
Point 2 is learning sciences. So does this align with how cognitive science says we actually, acquire knowledge?
And what's point 3?
Human values. Dignity, belonging, agency. The whole argument from the Stanford team is that most edtech fails because it only has 2 of the 3.
Give me an example of a failure mode. Like what happens if you're missing one of those?
Okay, so imagine you have great tech and great learning science. It drills you on math facts perfectly, but it ignores human values. It feels like a surveillance state. It maximizes test scores, but it just kills the joy of learning. That's a failure.
Or if you have, say, values in tech, but no learning science.
Then you have a toy. It's fun, it's inclusive, it looks great on an iPad, but nobody actually learns anything. So the winners of this challenge, they had to hit the center of that triangle. They had to prove they could use AI to strengthen agency.
Agency is the key word there. Sarahi mentioned that specifically tools that deepen connection, which is, it's ironic because usually when I use something like ChatGPT, I feel like I'm outsourcing my agency. Here, bot, you write the difficult email for me.
Yeah.
I'm doing less.
That's the trap. That is the definition of automation, but the winners we're looking at today are doing the opposite. They're using AI to clear the brush, the barriers, so the human can walk the path themselves.
They aren't doing the thinking for the student.
No, they're removing the obstacles that prevent the student from thinking.
Okay, let's get concrete. Because the philosophy is great, but the stories are what sold me. And there was one story, one winner, that we just have to start with. It hit me harder than I expected for a tech deep dive. We need to talk about Hiroshi Mendoza.
Yes.
And his project, Read Sidekick.
This was the emotional anchor of the whole ceremony. And it's so important because it didn't start with a line of code or a VC pitch. It started with a failure of the school system.
So set the scene for us.
Yeah.
Hiroshi is 10 years old.
10 years old, just moved from Mexico City to the U.S., doesn't speak English yet. He's sitting in a classroom feeling totally invisible, and the teacher makes that classic, terrible mistake, asks him to read out loud.
Oh, that is nightmare fuel. I'm sweating just thinking about it.
A complete nightmare. He's trying to decode English letters with a Spanish brain, reading with a Spanish cadence. The class laughs at him, he's humiliated, shuts down.
But he does figure it out eventually. He taught himself using, was it animorphs?
Animorphs, which, by the way, is such a great example of agency. He didn't learn because a teacher forced him. He learned because he desperately wanted to know the story.
He used a dictionary, just decoding it word by word.
He built his own scaffold because the school didn't give him one.
But the real twist in this story isn't just about Hiroshi. It's about his brothers. He calls it the tale of two brothers. And this is where it shifts from a personal story to really a systemic critique.
Right. He has a younger brother who is hearing and an older brother, Saji, who was born deaf. So, fast forward 20 years, both brothers, very smart, both go to software boot camps to get into the tech industry.
And this is where the paths just completely diverge.
Drastically. The hearing brother gets a job, high income, successful transition. Saji, the deaf brother, just hits a wall. He can't make that leap.
Why not? I mean, if they both learn the coding logic, if they both get Python or Java, what's the barrier?
Literacy. And this is something that hearing people, and I include myself in this, we often completely misunderstand this. We just assume that because deaf people can see, they can read English just fine. But Hiroshi shared this, a brutal statistic.
The 20% employment gap.
A 20% employment gap between deaf and hearing populations. And he says it's largely driven by these literacy barriers.
Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah.
Why is reading English so much harder if you're deaf? It's just text on a page.
Well, think about how you learn to read. You learn phonics. You learn that CAT spells cat. It's an audio-based system.
You're mapping shapes to sounds you already know.
Exactly. But if you have never heard the sound of C, that whole instruction model is completely broken. English is essentially a second language for the deaf community, but it's one they're rarely taught properly because the pedagogy relies on sound.
So Saiji is stuck. He's got the intellect, the coding skills, but all the documentation, the Slack messages, the job applications, it's all text-based.
It's a wall of text. So Hiroshi decides to build Read's Sidekick. And he applies that triangle philosophy we were talking about. He isn't trying to fix his brother. He's trying to fix the interface between his brother and the world.
So how does it actually work? Because I've seen translation apps. Google Translate has been around for ages.
It has two layers. The first layer is about text comprehension. It uses AI to act like a whispering tutor.
Okay.
It doesn't just translate word for word, which, by the way, usually ends up as gibberish because ASL grammar is completely different from English.
Right. You lose all the context. Literal translation is almost always a mess.
Exactly. So Hiroshi used a concept from learning sciences called juicy sentences.
Juicy sentences. That sounds messy.
It's a term from a Professor Fillmore at Berkeley. It just means taking a complex, dense sentence and breaking it down into chunks, explaining the who, the what, the why.
And then rephrasing it at the user's reading level.
It scaffolds the meaning, so it's not dumbing it down, it's unpacking it. It's like having a really patient teacher sitting next to you saying, okay, this part here actually refers back to the start of the paragraph.
That alone is huge.
Correct. But then Hiroshi did the thing that everyone told him was impossible. He decided to translate written English into visual sign language.
And to be clear, we're not talking about just text on a screen. We're talking about an animated avatar actually signing the words.
Yes. And when he first pitched this, the tech experts were like, you can't do that. It's too complex. And to be fair to the skeptics, they were right about the old way of doing it.
Why? I mean, we have ChatGPT. It can write poetry in French. It can write code. Why can't it translate hello into ASL?
Okay, this is a really interesting technical nuance. If you ask a standard LLM, like ChatGPT, to translate into ASL, it gives you something called ASL gloss.
Gloss.
Gloss is a notation system. It's like writing, you go store now. It captures the signs, but it strips out everything else.
And in sign language, everything else is the whole point.
The face is the grammar. That is the golden rule of ASL. If I sign I am running with a blank face, it means I'm jogging. If I sign I am running with my eyebrows raised and my mouth tense, it means I am fleeing from my life.
Wow.
Standard AI models flatten all that nuance. They are tone deaf, literally and figuratively. They give you the robot voice version of a language that is inherently dramatic and, visual.
So how did Hiroshi solve it? If the big models couldn't do it, what did he do?
He stopped relying on scraped internet data. He spent $10,000 of his own money to hire a professional ASL interpreter named Christine.
Wow.
They went into a studio and they built their own data set from scratch.
That's incredible dedication. He didn't just take what was available. He built the data he actually needed.
He had to. They mapped over 60 specific facial expressions and these spatial quadrants, so where the hands are in relation to the body, which indicates time and relationship. They trained a whole new model to take English text, tokenize it, and then drive these animated avatars that actually perform the language.
So now his brother Saji can highlight a paragraph of complex technical documentation, and an avatar on his screen just signs it to him. Eyebrows, spatial positioning, finger spelling, all of it.
That right there is the definition of augmentation. It creates access for the 120 million people globally who lack literacy skills. It doesn't read the book for them. It unlocks the book to them.
It lets Saji apply his intelligence to the problem, instead of spending all his cognitive energy just trying to decode the instructions.
Exactly.
It's an amazing story, and it really anchors that values point of the triangle.
Okay.
But Read Sidekick was just one of the 12 winners. So when we zoom out and look at the rest of the pack, do you see a pattern? Or is it just a random grab bag of cool ideas?
No, there are definitely clear themes. If Hiroshi's project was about access, the next big cluster of winners is all about tuning in to the learner, specifically dealing with the neurodiversity and emotional well-being.
I did notice that. There was a project called Generative AI Learning Lab for Children with Autism.
Think about the standard classroom software. It's so rigid.
It beeps at you.
It beeps at you. It expects you to sit still and click the right box in 5 seconds. For a neurodivergent child, that interface itself is the barrier. It causes sensory overload or frustration before any learning can even start.
So how does the AI change that?
It basically makes the software liquid. It adapts the content, the interaction style to the specific internal state of the child. If the child needs high contrast visuals, it adapts. If they need slower pacing, it adapts. It's moving away from the student must fit the system
To the system must fit the student.
Exactly.
That seems to bleed into the other big theme I saw, which is well-being. There were 2 winners here. You good and flourish.
This is such a fascinating shift. 5 years ago, EdTech was all about like Math Blaster and flashcards. These tools are explicitly therapeutic.
Is that safe? I mean, having a student talk to a chatbot about their anxiety, that feels a little risky. I could just hear the parents worrying about it.
It's a totally valid concern, and that's why the learning science and values points of that triangle are so important. These tools aren't trying to be psychiatrists.
So what are they?
They're acting as emotional mirrors. Take you good. It creates a non-judgmental space for reflection. A teenager might not walk into a guidance counselor's office because of the stigma, or the counselor is just busy, but they will type into an app.
Right?
The AI is trained to help them practice emotional regulation, building resilience, identifying stress triggers. It's not fixing them, it's helping them regulate so they can actually be in a headspace to learn.
You can't learn algebra if your brain is in fight or flight mode.
You can't. By using AI to lower that emotional barrier, you augment the cognitive capacity. You're clearing the brush again.
Speaking of algebra, we have to talk about math everywhere. This one sounded the most like science fiction to me, but also the most fun.
This is from Omo and his team, and they are tackling the oldest complaint in the history of education.
When am I ever going to use this?
Exactly. Why do I need to know what a parabola is?
Never going to use a parabola.
Right. So Math Everywhere basically says, okay, look around you. It uses computer vision. You point your phone at a basketball shot, and it overlays the parabola on the screen. You point it at a bridge, and it shows you the geometry holding it up.
So it's taking the abstract and just plastering it onto the concrete world.
It contextualizes the learning. It's not just numbers on a page anymore. It's the code that runs the physical world.
Yeah.
It augments your vision to see the math in your daily life. It fights disengagement by proving relevance instantly.
I love that. But I want to pivot to the one category that usually scares teachers the most: writing.
Ah, yes. The ChatGPT killed the essay debate.
Right. There's a winner called co-designing analytical writing. Now, usually when a student uses AI for writing, it's to cheat. It's to generate the end product. How is this different?
This project is so vital because it flips the model from output to process. Right now, we grade the output. Here is your essay on Hamlet. So naturally, the student wants the AI to generate that output efficiently. Mitchell's tool uses AI as a co-designer. It acts like a developmental editor. It talks to you during the drafting phase. It might ask, hey, you made this point about Hamlet's madness, but does that connect to your thesis?
So it's prompting you to think harder. Instead of doing the thinking for you, it's actually challenging you.
Precisely. It values the struggle of the thought process. It's strictly designed to avoid doing the writing, but to support the structuring of the argument. It keeps the human in the loop for the cognitive work.
It feels like there's a recurring theme here of moving from being a passive consumer to an active creator.
That's explicitly what the AI Studio Teams project by Keith Cole is about. Stop having kids just scroll TikTok. Give them AI tools to design media, to build things. It shifts the entire dynamic from consumption to creation.
And finally, we can't ignore the boring stuff, the administration.
The plumbing.
The plumbing, there was a winner called Math Adoption Playbook.
Listen, it's not sexy, but it's probably the most high-leverage tool here. Schools spend millions on new math curriculums. And then what happens?
Those books sit in a closet.
Right. Or teachers don't know how to use them, and the implementation just fails. This creates a huge adoption gap.
So this is AI as a project manager.
Basically,
Yeah.
it guides the school leadership through the fidelity of adoption. It makes sure the human value of that expensive math program actually reaches the kid at the desk.
It augments the administration so they can stop drowning in spreadsheets and start actually supporting teachers.
It's the unglamorous work that makes the system function.
Exactly.
So when we step back and look at this whole mosaic, from Hiroshi's sign language avatars to emotional support bots to seeing math through a camera, what are we actually seeing? What's the signal here?
We are seeing a counter-narrative. For the last 2 years, the story has been AI doom or AI cheating. These 12 winners prove that if you anchor innovation in learning sciences, how the brain actually works and human values, what we actually care about, the technology looks completely different.
It stops looking like a replacement, and it starts looking like a scaffold, a bridge. Sarahi Espinoza Salamanca, she summed it up perfectly at the end. She said, ultimately, the future of AI in education will not be defined by what machines can do, but by what we choose to amplify in people.
What we choose to amplify, that's the key choice, isn't it? We can choose to amplify our laziness. We can use AI to do the chores so we can sit on the couch.
Or we can use it to amplify our curiosity, our empathy, our ability to understand a brother who speaks a different language. The technology itself is neutral. The direction we point it in, that's up to us.
That's a powerful place to land, and I think that leaves us with a pretty good question for you, the listener, to chew on.
What's that?
We've talked a lot about this difference between augmentation and automation. If you could have an AI sidekick, one that refused to do your job for you, but was strictly designed to amplify one specific human skill you value in yourself, what would it be? Would you want it to amplify your patience, your creativity, your ability to listen?
It's a question worth asking. Because the tech is coming either way, we might as well decide what we want it to make us into.
Thanks for diving in with us today.
Stay curious.